and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, we are exploring a multi-front approach in Michigan against data center development and the corporate influence that fuels it. Organizers in the state are pursuing interlocking ballot measures which would tax the rich to better fund education, while also banning lobbying by corporations who pursue ecologically devastating development in the state. I'll be joined by organizing director of 482 Forward, Molly Sweeney, Michigan Money Out of Politics organizer, Christy McGillivray, and director of the Tishman Center for Social Justice and the Environment at the University of Michigan, Michelle Martinez. But first, these headlines. Last week, San Francisco teachers won almost all of their demands after their first strike in nearly 50 years. This was positioned as part of a larger effort by teachers across California, and their new contract includes progressive pay raises, 100% employer-paid insurance coverage for dependents, as well as sanctuary schools provisions, protections against AI, and prevents special education from being contracted out of the district. Congress is out this week, but DHS funding has lapsed. And unfortunately, this does not include law enforcement, so it doesn't mean relief to communities that are under siege from ICE. This is the third partial government shutdown since Trump took office. The shutdown also prevented an official House delegation to the Munich Security Conference, but that didn't mean there weren't a huge number of American lawmakers in Germany last week. The proceedings included an official speech by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who attempted to walk back a little bit of J.D. Vance's rhetorical bombast from last year. The conference was also attended by a slate of Democratic presidential hopefuls who tried to strike a more conciliatory tone with Europe, from Gavin Newsom to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Hillary Clinton also made an appearance to brag about deporting people without putting immigrants in concentration camps, which says a lot. And for a meeting about the U.S.-European alliance, there was a lot of domestic U.S. politics on display. Meanwhile, European leaders used the opportunity to remind their American counterparts that MAGA has squandered basically all of the United States' moral and political leadership on the world stage. This all in spite of Democrats' assurances that the transatlantic alliance is merely dormant and not dead. But it's pretty clear that a lot of European leaders are not keen on staying dependent on the whims of the U.S. government, given everything we've been through for the past 13 months. And finally, last week, it became the official policy of the U.S. government and the Environmental Protection Agency that climate change does not exist. Trump announced that the EPA would officially terminate their endangerment findings from a 2009 study, which is the bedrock of scientific data that backs the reality of human-caused climate change. This wholesale erasure of data clears the way for the EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, to do the exact opposite of his job. He and Trump excitedly announced plans to lift the floodgates on any regulations or restrictions for fossil fuel energy providers. Meanwhile, in a report published last week by the Washington Post, it was revealed that in the past 3 years, global temperatures have shown an acceleration beyond explanation of most climate modeling. So anyway, let's talk data centers right after this break.
Hi, this is Josh Elstro, the senior multimedia producer here at Convergence Magazine. That means I have the privilege of working on all the audio and video projects that you see coming from Convergence day in and day out. I hope you'll consider becoming a member of Convergence. We're a small independent operation and rely heavily on our readers and listeners just like you to support this work. You can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. You'll find a direct link to that in the show notes, of course. Monthly and annual memberships start at just $10 a month, or you can even make a one-time donation. Any amount helps build a better independent media ecosystem, one that supports people's movements while opposing fascism. But at $10 monthly and above, you get access to exclusive subscriber content and events. If you can't afford anything right now, don't worry, our shows and print content are always going to be free for you to enjoy. You could still help by leaving a podcast review, following on Instagram, or even subscribing to our YouTube. Thanks for listening.
At the end of 2024, Michigan's state-level Democratic trifecta passed a massive tax incentive for data centers to the tune of $90 million in exchange for, essentially, an IOU for future quote-unquote community benefits. Organizers saw this as representative of a two-pronged problem: desperation on the part of local and state governments to bring in revenue, and corporate control of the functions of democracy. In the time since, Michigan has fast-tracked data centers, and those community benefits have been elusive. As pushback against data center development has ramped up as a nonpartisan community issue across the country in the time since the tax break was passed, organizers in the state have begun circulating petitions for two ballot measures which address both sides of this problem. Invest in My Kids is a ballot measure that would repair a regressive tax and require the rich to pay their fair share into the education system. And Money Out of Politics would dismantle the system of lobbying, which allows corporate control of the state assembly. Joining me today to discuss the state of data center development in Michigan and what these ballot initiatives are trying to do are the co-founder and organizing director of 482 Forward and steering committee member of the Invest in My Kids ballot initiative, Molly Sweeney. Molly, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Caden.
The executive director of Voters Not Politicians and a steering committee member of the Michigan Money Out of Politics ballot initiative, Christy McGillivray. Christy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And the director of the Tishman Center for Social Justice and the Environment at the University of Michigan, Michelle Martinez. Michelle, thanks for joining us.
Hey, friends.
So let's set a little context here about the sort of state of data center development in Michigan. What are some of the deals that you've seen play out? What is the sort of timeline that we're talking about here? And how did the issues around data centers kind of come to your all's attention? Why don't we start with Michelle?
Great. Yeah, thanks. And appreciate being online with all of you, learning about data centers. So this was a fight that I did not want to get into after 20 years of being in fossil fights in my hometown of Detroit. I was pretty burnt out when a comrade of mine, Andrea Pierce, who is one of the founders of the Michigan Anishinaabe Caucus, came to me and said, this data center thing is really harsh. It's going to be terrible for Michigan, and it's going to be terrible for our rate structures, our energy utility payers, and more. And I was asked to join and to start doing some research behind it. And that was late in 2024, and it took me a while. But, the important thing for listeners to understand is that this is not just a new industry. This is not just a new factory online. This can change the fabric of our society and completely modify local ecosystems, our energy infrastructure, and the workforce as we know it. This is kind of a moment where we're calling everybody in to say, hey, data centers are not just a new industry, but they're huge energy consumers. They're huge water consumers, and they house artificial intelligence, military surveillance. Our local one here at University of Michigan will be working on nuclear weapons development. It's also changing our relationships with social media, data inferencing, cryptocurrency, and all of those things will be housed in supercomputers right in our backyards.
So what is it then that is so alluring, or what are the sort of promises that were kind of made around these data centers, and why is it that the government of the state of Michigan were like, cool, let's go ahead and do this? Molly, I see you sort of laughing to yourself a little bit. I'll pass to you.
Yeah. So I'm primarily an education organizer. We work on public school issues. And so why data centers? And in 2024, I remember running into a room with other organizers. I don't know if Christy was there. And I was like, there's this data center thing. And everyone looked at me like I was nuts. And they were like, why do you care? And, we work on public school organizing. The biggest issue for us is that Michigan's public schools are $4.5 billion underfunded. Mm-hmm. We're at 2006 levels of funding at 2026 prices. And at the time, the governor's office, and this is really where Christy and I at Sierra Club became friends when Christy was at Sierra Club, was introducing a 6% sales tax and the use exemption on data centers. And schools are primarily funded from sales tax in Michigan. Mm-hmm. And the state rep who was pushing the data center issue, who had just, I think, flown to Seattle on a trip to look at with Google, was using schools and school finance as the reason why we needed these. And so it was this real manipulation.
Let's say should we say his name? It was Joey Andrews. I think it's important.
Yes. Yeah. Joey Andrews. And, for us, it was this manipulation of in Michigan, people want jobs. People want good schools, and we don't have them right now. And so the data center push that we were hearing in this exemption bill was for Benton Harbor in particular, which is one of our our Black cities in Michigan who's been divested emergency management, like the mayor of Benton Harbor, they want good schools, they want good jobs. And they were using data centers and this tax exemption as a way to say, this is the only way we're going to get those things. We're going to get school dollars because it's going to bring jobs and more people. And that was the reason of like, we'll bring more people and more jobs, and therefore we get more money for our schools. And I remember Christy and I having a conversation even with folks in the governor's office and other state reps, and they were like, well, if we don't do this exemption, they're going to go to Wisconsin. And so it's like this race to the bottom, right? Like, and that's how Michigan really, it's like this economic development lens that they're manipulating folks. People want good things here. And so like they're the race to the bottom of like, just give it all away to corporations and then we'll get good schools and then we'll get good communities. And so that's how we first got introduced. And really is the lens of like economic development and financing in the state is like both parties have said the only way we can make Michigan great and beautiful and wonderful for folks and have great public services is by selling it to big corps.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What's interesting is the thing that you're describing feels very like when you lay it out like that, it's like, well, of course, not taxing these corporations is going to drop revenue. But there's something very there, like this argument that by creating tax incentives and bringing new business to a state is like the only way to like grow the pool of available resources is something that like we hear time and time again. Like, in California where I live, a lot of it is like, oh, we have to have these tax incentives or the billionaires will leave, right? Yeah. Like, like there's a scaremongering about like, I think you're right. It's like a race to the bottom about like, where these companies will invest their money.
Yeah, it's actually not just not paying taxes. It's more insidious than that, actually. Like a lot more insidious. So, the way that Molly characterized it is absolutely right. They pitched it as the thing that was going to save a struggling local school district, right? And the claim was that the company coming in was going to give the school district $20 million. I don't know why they just don't pay taxes. And also that $20 million was nowhere in writing anywhere. And last time I checked, people don't give away $20 million without having it being an enforceable writing. Furthermore, these tax breaks actually were introduced in 2015. So a version of these bills had been in place since 2015. And they had been used primarily in a county in Michigan called Kent County. And they're not just sales and use tax exemptions. In those bills, they can come for other things. And they did. So when they set up the original whole tax break scheme, they also set up ways to come for tax dollars through tax capture and other backdoors to get out of paying other sales and use tax exemptions. So there was some really amazing reporting coming out of Washington State, and ProPublica spent years compiling it. This sales and use tax exemption, specifically for data centers in Washington State, ballooned into one of the largest corporate tax giveaways ever in the state's history. And that's because they set up the pieces to start coming for more. So when State Rep Joey Andrews started screaming about how we were going to save our public schools if we give tax breaks to Silicon Valley billionaires becoming trillionaires. Again, why not just fund public education? When he started pitching that, I was like, I had been focused on a lot of the environmental issues, but I was like, the numbers aren't lining up here. Like, according to the Senate analysis, the sales and use tax exemption only results in like a couple $1 million a year in saving for these companies. They have billions of dollars. That's nothing. That's like couch cushion lint. It's not even change. Right? So why are they absolutely like shitting a brick over these sales and use tax exemptions? The math doesn't add up. So I started reading them over and over and over again to try and find the tax scam. And I found 3. They can come for local tax capture. They don't actually have to hold themselves accountable to creating any jobs. And if they're set up on a brownfield or an old power plant site, they can put all sorts of new things into those agreements. So what is in writing was that they can come for a lot more money. What is not right was any of their promises about how they would actually help public schools.
I mean, what it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what it sounds like is like this is now a playbook for them.
Yes, of course it's a playbook. It's absolutely a playbook. So it's not just that they're getting a tax break. They're taking the hard-earned tax dollars of Michiganders that want better schools. It is the ultimate transfer of wealth. I don't understand why billionaires stealing our tax dollars is somehow appropriate in economic development, but making sure our kids have good schools is not economic development. What is that? Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's infuriating.
So coming back to this moment in the Michigan State Legislature when Andrea Pierce was coming for me, we had a Democratic trifecta. And in that, the progressive movement and so many of our organizing fronts had actually elected this through hard-earned organizing, boots on the ground, building teams in rural Michigan, Upper Peninsula, the tip of the mitt, with farm worker communities to make sure that we won this. And we did by hundreds of votes in some cases. And we had a progressive agenda on the table. There were things like water affordability that Michiganders still do not have. There were things around rent controls and protecting renters across Michigan. The Secretary of State doesn't allow driver's licenses for undocumented people, something that we knew we needed after Trump was elected to protect our undocumented friends and neighbors. All of these things and so much more was on the table. And the Democrats had the opportunity to pass each of these bills and put them on the docket. But the one thing that they chose above all of these other agenda items was data centers. And that's what put a fire under my ass. Because if we are working for a party system that's meant to help support our friends and neighbors, communities all over Michigan, no matter where you live or how much money you earn, right? We all want a future where Michiganders can live and breathe clean air. Data centers is going in the opposite direction. And so that's really the hardest part. I mean, fast forward today, they're now saying that the amount of electric generation that's being proposed, that's in the pipeline for our two utilities, that's DTE Energy and Consumer Energies, which, by the way, they're monopoly investor-owned utilities. Okay, is more electricity generation in 4 years than our entire industrial sector in Michigan. So that's automotive industry, steel manufacturing, right? Chemical manufacturing, oil processing, all of it. So just to put that in perspective, it's not nuts and bolts. It's an entirely new energy system that we have to build. And it has all kinds of downstream impacts.
Well, before we talk a little bit about the ballot initiatives, I am curious about what kind of environmental impacts also that you all are thinking about, because we've talked about the sort of like political landscape. We've talked about the like economic impacts the tax breaks might have in terms of schools and stuff like that. But like, obviously a big piece of a lot of data center fight is that like there are these downstream environmental impacts, but has there been discussion of that? And like, what are the things that you all are on the lookout for?
But, you know, interestingly, the reason why this popped up on my radar screen was because the state legislature passed a renewable energy package in late 2023. And it took a ton of effort, flawed legislation, but there were some good benchmarks in there and a few like tight loopholes that we thought the fossil fuel industry was going to have a hard time getting around. And so that was December of 2023. In January of 2024, at the time I was working for Sierra Club, I read the first article about a coal plant staying online to power data centers. And that was the first like account I can remember of someone saying a coal plant is going to stay online because this generation surge is coming. And I like, that was kind of like when the penny dropped. And I was like, oh God, because in our package, and this is really standard and it makes sense if you think about it, if there's an increase in demand, utilities and anyone producing electricity have a mandate to produce energy no matter what, because power going out can actually like, you know, lead to people dying, right?
Yeah.
So in any sort of utility regulation, there are always what are called off-ramps to make sure that any utility can prioritize generating electricity no matter what. So if you have a massive increase in demand, they don't have to meet renewable energy goals, right? And so started looking at it, started worrying, and then AI, there's just this onslaught, right? This massive AI explosion. And so throughout the course of 2024, we were both educating ourselves on exactly what was going on, which is actually really hard because these companies force everyone to sign NDAs. Like there was like, like refuse to hand over water use, actual data, for example. They claim it's proprietary. It's so shady. So I was primarily looking at it from the energy side, but of course, being in the Great Lakes state, water is an issue too. And functionally, what Democrats in Michigan did is they walked away from their renewable energy mandate in order to give tax breaks to the Silicon Valley billionaires that are currently destroying democracy and building a surveillance state. That's what they did. So they destroyed their one legislative victory on the environment in service of making Mark Zuckerberg richer.
I mean, this sounds like a real match made in hell. Like, like big tech and fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, and it's really insidious because, and this is the really insidious thing, like everyone's coming together across political divides right now because they hate data centers. Republicans and Democrats hate data centers. Well, voters, I should say. Elected officials is
voters. Yeah.
But one of the misinformation things that's getting out there is that on the right, they're saying enviros love data centers because it forces people to build renewable energy. And I just want to be clear, that is like not true. Not true. They are keeping fossil fuels online and building more fossil fuel infrastructure. They are not building enough renewable energy. Anyway, but Michelle can talk a lot more too about some of the environmental impacts. But I encourage folks to check out what's happening in Memphis. There are some very serious environmental justice concerns. And one of the bullshit arguments from these bill sponsors was that we were actually being discriminatory and racist against communities of color here in Michigan because we didn't want them to have good jobs. So I'll turn it over to Michelle to talk about the actual like racism.
How many jobs?
None.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the threats to democracy is the real ringer here. Right? Because as I began to do research about what the impacts of these data centers are, I kept encountering that thing Christy's talking about, which is the non-disclosure agreements. And so all over the country, right? You look at Virginia, that's been dealing with data centers and has the most data centers anywhere in the United States. 80% of data centers are under non-disclosure agreements. So it's not a small problem that we're dealing with. The other problem here is that, within the United States, they're projecting between 4% and 12% total energy growth over the next 4 years. That's a huge range. And the reason that range is happening is because the way that data centers actually begin to mark how much energy they're going to use is only based on their internal analysis to their own data center efficiency. It's not actually an apple to apples comparison of other data centers. So you might have really fast chips, but it consumes more energy. Or you might have a closed loop water system, which consumes more energy. Maybe you have an evaporative system. So there's mechanical and technical aspects that have this huge range of energy consumption. And without actually having the ability to say, okay, friends, like, are you going to submit that data to us so we can actually model out how much energy we're going to be putting on the grid at any particular time? They're like, nope, we can't. These are industry secrets that keep us competitive against China.
Sure.
And so we're in this situation where you look at PJM, who just in January, right? Remember the cold snap that happened all over the United States, and everybody's turning up their heat if they have it, or bringing in other appliances. Well, they're worried, right, that they're going to have to tell data centers to turn on their generators because there's literally not enough power on the grid to supply both our homes and our businesses and data centers. And so with this huge, huge amount of uncertainty is this growing worry that grid operators are not going to be able to provide enough energy. And we all know that power comes from power plants. And so what we're seeing in the data is that there is a projected 13% increase in carbon dioxide emissions just from data centers globally. So while we should be rolling back, right, stopping and slowing down the runaway train on climate, tech billionaires are like pouring gasoline on the fire and they're like, yeah, bitches, light another cigarette off that shit, right?
I mean, they all think they can go to Mars, right?
Really, what are we doing, friends? Like planetary crisis.
Because they want the money.
I mean, I'm making jest of it, but it's terrifying. Like you read some of this stuff and you're like, my eyes are bleeding. Like what's happening?
It does kind of defy logic when you think about the scale of what we're talking about here. And like, I do think that it's hard. It is a scale that I do think it's like hard for people to wrap their brains around, because like, it's just bigger than I think human brains can kind of like conceptualize. That like, this is a scale that is not just something that you can look at with your eyes and see, that it's like much larger than that.
Right.
So.
I think that's accurate. I remember when the first numbers that I really started reading about their potential power consumption, I didn't believe them. I was like, surely this is wrong. I was like, this reporter got this wrong. They're not going to reopen 3 Mile Island. They're not opening an entire nuclear power plant just for a data center. That's insane. I literally didn't believe it. And then I was like, I went and checked it and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. But they don't tell Michiganders that bill gets passed on to you.
And I think that's the more insidious part that we're seeing in Michigan, is that some data centers that use for storage or other purposes can be put in rural areas. And so in many places in Michigan, how it's showing up is in poor middle class, rural white communities. And we're deeply segregated in Michigan.
Yep.
And while on the face of this, right, these are deep red counties that are out and out outraged at City Hall meetings all over the place. What is going to roll downhill is that energy costs are going to go up, like Molly said, and also the power plants that these facilities rely on are in Black and brown communities. And so there is an invisibilization going on of how this is. Data centers are an EJ issue, but maybe on the face of it, in some places, it's not looking like the quote unquote traditional environmental justice fights that we've been a part of in the past.
That's really interesting.
Well, and there's like really interesting opportunities. I mean, I think this is like, there's an interesting place in the data center organizing where in these small rural communities, sometimes their first reaction is like the racist trope of like, why not just move it to Detroit? And I think there's a really big opportunity to build. I mean, honestly, check the comments on Facebook. That is the very first comment is like, just move it to Detroit. And so I think there's opportunities for EJ and environmental organizers to really push people and like a solidarity lens. Otherwise, I think this turns into actually like the same thing we've always seen, right? It's like
just some racist NIMBY stuff. Yeah.
I mean, there's also like anti-Jewish stuff. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the comments.
Yeah. I am sure.
Which I think we can engage with it, and like that's moving people forward.
I mean, that's a good segue into the conversation about these ballot initiatives. There's 2 of them. But Molly, let's start with Invest in My Kids. What is the ballot initiative trying to do, and where did it come from?
So after years of wealthy and corporate control of Lansing, Michigan schools are $4.5 billion underfunded. From the tip of the UP down to Detroit, schools look very similar. They're closing. We have some of the worst teacher retention rates in the country. 8,000 teachers leave a year. You know the story. Our literacy rates are awful because our class sizes are ballooning, and we can't retain teachers, especially special education teachers. So our ballot initiative is 10 years in the making after we've seen control of Lansing from DTE, from wealthy Michiganders like Betsy DeVos. And after watching the trifecta in Michigan fight harder for our corporate tax breaks for Ford, DTE, et cetera, versus passing broad scale new revenue for public education, we decided to take it to the ballot. And so the Invest in My Kids ballot initiative is a new surtax on individuals who make $500,000 a year and couples that make $1 million. Any dollar they make over, 5% of that will be a new tax for public education for lowering class size, career and tech, and attracting and retaining teachers. And we're putting it in the Constitution. because we do not want the legislature to mess with it.
Amazing.
Yeah. And if we pass it, it would be an extra $1.6 billion for public education in the state. So that's, we're going to the heart of like actually taxing the rich in this moment, tied to what we're calling a frame Michigan for the many with Christie's ballot initiative, which is getting money out of politics, because we believe you have to tax the wealthy for like the public good that we care about, and you have to eliminate the influence of big corporations.
Great. Well, Christy, tell us a little bit about the Money Out of Politics initiative.
So Michiganders for Money Out of Politics is going after closing some of Michigan's nastiest campaign finance loopholes. Here in Michigan, we allow politicians to open up 501c4s, which are nonprofit organizations, and they can take political contributions to those operations. So it's not just PAC money, it's not just super PAC money, and the super PAC money is, of course, the Citizens United money. It is also this 501c4 loophole. And we have at various points on various scales been rated actually the most corrupt state legislature in the country. It is egregious how corrupt Lansing is. And I think we really saw it come to a head during this last Democratic trifecta. So what this would do, similar to what Molly described with our ballot process, but we are not going for a constitutional amendment. We are going for to pass it as a law, basically via ballot referendum. So the signature threshold is a little bit lower. But what it would do is it would cut elected officials and party chairs and a list of various party entities off from using those 501c4s for contributions from regulated utilities. So it's DTE and consumers. There's others too in that list, but those are the two big ones. And anyone who has a contract with the state worth $250,000 or more. And these two distinctions, the fact that regulated utilities only exist because the state basically allows them to, and then they're governed through the Public Service Commission, and then contractors with the state who have a direct conflict of interest when it comes to lobbying lawmakers for those contracts, that holds up to Citizens United. So that's why we picked this particular frame. It's been tested in 15 different states. So there's precedent saying this holds up to Citizens United. And we will not have a functioning state government until we tackle the corrupting influence of money in politics. It's just impossible to get around this. Just to give you a few short anecdotes, when legislators first get elected to office and they go to Lansing, they are instructed by party leaders on how to set up their 501c4s to take money they don't want their constituents to know about. It's like literally a training they all get.
Wow.
It is completely out of control. They're the former.
That's why we prioritize tax cuts for corporations over people.
Exactly.
Whoa.
And to give you some other concrete examples, people will tell you straight up, if DTE is opposed to this, it is not happening. Just full stop. DTE has primaried Republicans. They have primaried Democrats and won because they can just dump as much money on the race as they want to. We've seen, like, for example, community solar legislation, which actually has bipartisan support because Republicans like independents, or they used to. I don't know, things have gotten a little weird. But that legislation will never see the light of day. It just never will, because DTE doesn't like it. Our utilities don't want people to be able to produce their own power. So it's just dead on arrival, even though it has bipartisan support. So, Molly mentioned we have to deal with taxing the rich, right? And we have to deal with cutting off all the avenues in how they manipulate our democracy with their money. And she's absolutely right. I think that it's really important for folks to understand that our democracy will not survive the level of wealth accumulation that we're seeing right now, because wealth is a form of power, and democracies work when you balance power. That's the whole point, right? And if we allow people to become trillionaires and buy elections, that is not democracy. They should never be allowed to have that much money ever. So we have to tax them. We have to, in order to actually balance the power in society that allows democracy to exist. And then, of course, we have to go after corruption too.
Yeah, we're just playing into the hands of the fascists, right? This is a 50-year playbook that, especially with DeVos, where schools in Michigan are really the experiment, right? How do we kill public systems? Defund, discredit, right? It's like Milton Friedman his dreams coming to life. For real. I mean, if you go back to this is it, right? It's like defund, discredit, continue to do it. And then, when we think about Michigan, schools have always been this crux of like, how do we get that public education system away from the hands of our most powerful unions in the state, which are teachers unions,
Yep.
and in this country, right? So it's like, this is a game, like, how do we actually take this to the ballot? Because our legislature has never been courageous enough to do it. And to ballot initiatives, I mean, we're on an uphill battle because like institutional power still doesn't want these ballot initiatives. Both of us need about $1.5 million more to pay for our stuff.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, one, the way that you see these ballot initiatives working together on the data center issue, and how like data center development has become a sort of like tool in your organizing toolbox to drive these signature drives.
Michelle said it really well. Although really quickly, I will say, just to like illustrate, I'm going to let Michelle riff because she's got this. DTE is the entity that whipped the votes to pass those data center tax breaks. So we built a coalition that was blocking those bills for almost a calendar year. And if you can imagine how insane that fight is, like the governor of Michigan was saying that she wanted something to happen, and we got enough people in her party to say no. And it wasn't until DTE finally weighed in that it passed. And so I will turn it over to Michelle.
Great.
Yeah, I think the key point here is that ballot initiatives on democratic issues like tax distribution and like getting money out of politics are a key stress test for our electorate and for our organizing models. Because what we're finding with data centers is that the fight is at the zoning board level, which is wild, considering that a lot of our zoning boards are volunteer or not, are maybe elected, but uncompensated, and also township commissions, which may also be uncompensated, though elected, right? And when you have a huge, maybe 10, 20, 40, 80, $90 million check sitting on your desk, and a data center developer saying, okay, do you want this or not? These planning and zoning commissions are hard pressed to say no, because the fact of the matter is, yes, our local governments are being starved of revenue, both at the local level, but also at the state revenue level. And even in the case that a township like Saline Township said no, the data center developer, OpenAI, Oracle, Related Digital, went back and sued them. There's really no way that a local township can deal with a trillionaire with an army of lawyers to come back and say, okay, from our free will of what we actually want for the vision of our place can happen with that kind of threat behind it. So you're really between a rock and a hard place. And so for us, on the progressive end, the data centers fight has to be taken to a different platform, because it's true. All political banners, left, right, up, down, front, center, at the local level are opposed to data centers. And the thing that we're finding is that where we can find alignment has to be at the ballot box, because we're so polarized in Michigan for so many decades over bread and butter issues at the kitchen table that we can't see the forest for the trees because of the way the lobbyists have really owned the frame for so long.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle hit it on the head. I mean, we've been using these as, one, places to collect because people are gathering, but it's opportunities to really point people to who's to really blame, right? It's like, this is the wealthiest folks. These are the big corporations. And now it's in your backyard. You may have not thought it was here before, because a lot of places that, right, they're small, rural, white, mostly white communities. And so it's a moment of solidarity. It's a moment of eye-opening politicization. I mean, we have a great example from our folks up north. For a Bitcoin mining center and a data center that they activated in like a random white community. And folks are like, oh, wait, us too? Now we know. And so folks are getting more involved in the movement. And I think for us, we see it as an opportunity. And this is why we wanted to do the ballot initiatives, right? Like, people don't trust either party. Ballot initiatives are issue first. Issues matter to people. Your public schools, your teachers, your families, your economic well-being. And the data centers are another opportunity for us to say, like, hey, here it is. Like, you care about this. It's not about Dems. It's not about Republicans. Come to the ballot box to talk about things that matter to you. And for our hope is we're bringing more people into a solidarity movement that actually is going to make Michigan a better place, and push both parties to be better.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I want to tell like a couple stories about how like wildly popular this is. So we have a MAGA Republican, our Rep. Jim DeSena, who is 100% on board with this. He is out collecting signatures. He hates utilities. He is intensely critical of his
out
own
collecting
party.
signatures for MOP, not for Invest. So
Correct. Yeah. No, that is a good point, Molly. I'm going to tell a funny story about that in a second.
I will say there's not always a crossover between the data center folks and like wanting to tax the rich. So.
But he's very mad about corruption, right? It's the drain the swamp talking point. And the reason why drain the swamp became like a rallying cry for MAGA is because our politics is actually really corrupt. They weren't wrong, right?
Right.
So the difference, I think, is that between like me and like a MAGA person that's mad about corruption is that, I actually think the Trump administration is like the most grotesque corruption I've ever seen in my life, right? So it's like, that's the difference. That's the difference. But that's okay, right? Because we can get in the door and we can find common ground and we can have these conversations. So because of Rep. Jim DeSena, who I do trust on this issue, because he has very publicly taken incredibly strong positions, he's called out members of his own party, and he is out there getting signatures, right? He's sincere about this. And that's why I believe him, because he's actually doing the work. He's not just, giving the talking points. It's not an Epstein file situation, right? He's actually trying to fix it. So he has given us an in to this like MAGA world, right? So like we've presented to the Faith Family Freedom Coalition. We've talked with Great Lakes Gun Rights, which is very strange for me. Working to do a second presentation at Hillsdale College, which is like the most arch conservative, college in the entire country. It's here in Lenawee County, Michigan. So, no, I'm sorry, it's in Hillsdale County. Anyway, not important. So we have this in right now. And I just heard from another Voters Not Politicians volunteer who there's like a guy at a farmer's market with a giant MAGA hat. And the second he saw what she was doing, he said, I want to help get signatures too. And like was literally like rounding up everyone in the farmer's market to come sign to go after corruption. And it just goes to show that if we don't do exactly what Molly said and help harness this rage that people are feeling right now and direct it at the billionaires destroying our democracy, that rage is going to turn into racial violence and people are going to punch down. We have to stop that from happening. We have to, and we can. And I think the fact that these data centers are actually the backbone of the surveillance state that ICE is using right now to literally like kidnap people and do God knows what in those facilities, there's a direct connection there. There's a direct connection to the violence that ICE is perpetrating, these tech billionaires and data centers. And it is our job, we have a moral calling right now to stop that and go make sure people understand who is actually hurting them. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, that's great. There's something very heartening to hear about the ways in which this is opening doors to have conversations with regular Michiganders who might not otherwise be open to talking to your organizations, your coalitions, and that it also really points to the business as usual is just not working for people.
No one's going to go stump for candidates. We're not here.
Right. And it feels like the parties don't understand that.
No, they don't.
The state party or the national party.
They don't understand it. And it's interesting to see. I mean, I will say, we've been out here now for 6 months. And both of us have thousands of volunteers on the doors having conversations. I would say we have the best pulse on what Michiganders want, and the parties still don't see it. They're like, our Dem candidate, she's great on policy. Her husband works for data center.
Wait, more specifically, it's Oracle AI.
It's Oracle AI. And so
it's Larry Ellison who is literally buying up every single media outlet he can in order to, again, destroy democracy. Why are we doing business with him?
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to ask a question about the sort of obviously you're deep in the thick of collecting signatures. This is there's some real numbers that you have to push in this like next cycle. First of all, what is the sort of like arc of these campaigns? What is it going to take? And then I think one of the things that I've been seeing a lot of are folks thinking about how do we move in alignment together beyond the arc of a single campaign, and like how do we build? So I guess there's like two sort of like, as we start wrapping up, questions. One about like what are the sort of like actual mechanics of these ballot initiative campaigns, and then how are you thinking about moving this alignment forward beyond the arc of this campaign? How do you build towards something bigger here?
Great questions. So for Invest in My Kids, we have to get 446,000 valid signatures. And so we are about halfway there. We have a volunteer canvas that has about 3,000 people on the ground, massively pushing to get this on the ballot. We have 2 weeks of action right now. And then we have a paid canvas that we just launched about a month ago. That's shared with Mop Up Michigan. We're funding it together. And our goal is to finish up signatures early April and turn them into the state. What it will take, just frankly, is we need an extra $1.5 million between the campaigns to finish up paying for the paid canvas. It's such a large threshold, and the winter was really tough here, and volunteers don't like 5-degree weather.
Yeah, understandably.
And this is our first time doing this, right? Like, we're learning.
Yeah.
And our volunteers are learning. So that's what it will take for Invest. I will say for Invest in My Kids, this was the vision was always to create a larger distributive container for organizing around public education and democracy. And so we are going to be launching out of all these volunteers. I mean, we're IDing so many cool new leaders who like are ready to rock in their like small towns across Michigan, big cities. And so we're launching people organizing for public school teams, POPs teams across the state coming out of this that'll be working to build a broader vision for public education in the state, but also fighting for democracy. And so that's our plan.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Our threshold's a little bit lower because it's a statutory law. Voters Not Politicians has done this before. However, the context was really different. It's a big lift. Flooding the zone works. Social media is not actually a great place for organizing right now because all the tech bros went fascist. So, factors.
Yeah.
I will say, if you look at the money situation, 1.5 million sounds like a lot, and it is for normal people. It is not when you're looking at the amount of money sloshing around the political sphere right now.
Right.
So I think the reason that we don't see big...
The right in Michigan paid $6 million to get voter ID on the ballot. So
it sounds like a lot of money. It's actually not. And this is where we start getting really frustrated with people saying they care about democracy, but they don't understand that we have to deal with wealth inequality and corruption in order to save our democracy. Anyway, whatever. Someday they'll get there. But the bigger picture, Molly was talking about this ongoing investment in organizing for public education. That is 100% true. We don't have a democracy if we don't have education. And there has to be more done to distribute wealth in this country, and there has to be more done to fight corruption. So there is a table space here in Michigan called Michigan for the Many that is dedicated to all the different reforms that we need to make in pursuit of that. And one of the great things that I think Invest in My Kids does is quote Justice Brandeis from the Supreme Court. Justice Brandeis wrote in the 1920s that you can either have a democracy or a great concentration of wealth. You cannot have both. So this is going to be an ongoing, decades of our lives, probably the rest of our lives. There are going to be a series of things we have to do after this, and we are building the relationships and rehumanizing ourselves to other voters in Michigan that got sucked into the MAGA cult of lies about what it means to be American, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a voter. They have been sucked into this alternative universe powered by big tech disinformation that has convinced them we're the enemy. And by running ballot initiatives, we're showing them that we're not. And so we're going to get there.
Christy, just one more thing on that around the pro-revenue piece is there are zero funders, just to be clear. There's one funder in the entire country that really funds pro-revenue taxing the rich ballot initiatives, just to be clear. And you can think why, right? And so for us, the bigger piece is also turning both of these initiatives into long-term pro-revenue initiatives that are going to be fighting for bigger taxation, more accountability to wealthy folks in the state.
I love these women. I love ballot initiatives run by badass women. And I love that the door is open to so many volunteers. And look, I was at a community hearing in a small town in Michigan, Lyon Township, in which a data center 62 football fields big had been proposed and had totally jumped over procedural processes to get fast tracked. And in a 5-degree weather, 6-inch snowfall, hundreds of people came out to a community meeting saying, we don't understand why this is happening. We're angry. We're frustrated. What can we do about this? Asking for lawyers and information and FOIAs. But at the end of the day, it was the My Mop campaign that was saying the answer to this is money out of politics, and organizers there collecting signatures and recruiting people to the campaign. And this is the kind of power and the reclamation of people's agency and democracy that's happening in Michigan and needs to be supported financially, needs to be supported by funders. If you're independently wealthy, donate, right? Because it's not just about getting out there and boots on the ground, but it's also that financial support to support the labor that's happening behind this.
Yeah. Well, where can folks learn more about both these campaigns, plug in either as volunteers, as donors? Where can people find you on the internet?
All right, there's investinmikids.org for the Invest in My Kids ballot initiative.
And it's mopupmichigan.org for Michiganders for Money Out of Politics.
Fantastic. Well, Molly, Christy, Michelle, thank you so much for making the time to talk to me today. As a product of Michigan Public Schools, I could think of nothing more important.
Where'd you go, Kaden?
Yeah, where'd you go?
I went to International Academy.
Oh, did you went to IA?
Really?
And yeah, I did. And my mom was almost her entire career a special ed teacher in Troy Public School District.
Oh my God, you didn't mention that. That was so happy.
This stuff is all very near and dear to my heart as Michigander in exile in California. Well, thank you all for making the time. It was such a pleasure to learn about these really important campaigns and all the hard work that you are doing. I'm sure we will be keeping up with this, both these campaigns as things evolve.
We appreciate you.
Thank you, Kaden.
My thanks again to Molly, Michelle, and Christy for joining me today. You can read Molly and Michelle's article about the ballot measure campaigns at convergencemag.com. We'll also include links to the information about the Michigan ballot initiatives in the show notes. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Kaden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstro. Editorial assistance provided this week by Akin Allah, and Kimmy David designed our cover art. Convergence Magazine is a proud founding member of the Movement Media Alliance. And of course, if you liked what you heard, please let us know. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes, tell a friend, and rate and review the show wherever you listen. I would love to read your review. And finally, if you would like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, you can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. Even a few bucks a month goes a long way to making sure our independent small team can continue to build a map for our movements. I hope this helps.